Hello again. Following the resignation of Tulip Sadiq on the 14th of January, I wanted to make this video to expand on some of the themes I've developed in prior videos. The first one being that for an industry to be on sound foundations, you need to have integrity from the top down, and what I mean by that is the government and the regulator. Before moving on with that, I do acknowledge that the previous government were also very, very poor, and I'm not just making this video as a anti-Labour Party video. There are also some other themes. One would be the ongoing theme of the shortcomings and the conflicts of interest and the obfuscation that reside within the regulator-prosecutor model. We'll come across that. And there's another thing I'd like you to think of. What we see in contemporary times is a trend where if awkward themes are raised, awkward questions that relate from those themes are posed, what you see is just a culture of ignorance. That's why I've called this ignorance is bliss. Essentially, it's like the issues just don't exist. Authorities, officials, they just ignore the questions, and I'll try and make that point as I go through the video. Now, there's been a lot of coverage about the corruption allegations made towards Tulip Sadiq. I won't expand on these too much because there's a huge amount of reporting, and I do respect that Tulip Sadiq has the right to defend herself, but I'll just touch on a few points which you may have noticed. Firstly, the fact-finding mission into the ministerial code didn't, if you actually read the text, it didn't completely exonerate her. What was really noted was due to time constraints and lack of availability of relevant documentation, because if you remember the allegations or the scope of the ministerial code fact-finding mission related to property transactions a number of years ago. So if you were going to do that properly, you would have to investigate thoroughly the transfer of money, the people involved. It would probably need the cooperation of the Bangladeshi authorities and so on and so forth. But there wasn't the time or the resource allocated to do that. So what was said is largely Tulip Sadiq's word was taken as taken as true, and in that context they couldn't find a breach of the ministerial code. Now, you will have noticed that the Bangladeshi authorities, the scope of their investigation is far, far wider than the ministerial code, and so what they've tried to do is narrow it down and say, look, there's an exoneration, but she's only resigning because of the distraction to the government. But even if you look at the aesthetics behind the picture from 2013, which is put forward by some of the media, where it's the signing of the large infrastructure contract between Bangladesh and Russia, and Sadiq appears in an official photograph that was used by the TASS news agency of Russia. Now, at that time, in 2013, she was a Labour Party councillor. And yes, you can say, I travelled to Moscow to meet my aunt while she was there. That's fine. But would you appear in an official photograph relating to the signing of an infrastructure project with heads of state? Now, you can argue that maybe she would have taken some private pictures with Putin as she was there to see her aunt. That's fine. I wouldn't see an issue with that. But I don't think you would appear in an official photograph that was going to be used by the Russian TASS news agency if you were there merely to catch up with your aunt. Because what was her capacity in that photo when she was a Labour Party councillor at the time? This was in 2013, and also before the Russian annexation of Crimea, and which Putin's become more of a pariah since that time, and more so with the the invasion of Ukraine on the eastern side. So to me, the whole thing looks very poor, but I do note that Tulip Sadiq has the right to defend herself. You'll also notice quite a harsh contrast between Starmer's treatment of Louise Haigh, who was swiftly dispatched, but with Tulip Sadiq, a close friend of his. You'll also note, you don't have to look too far to see that Starmer has cordial relations with former officials of the former government of Bangladesh, headed by Sheikh Hassani, and Tulip Sadiq's aunt. He has very, very warm relations with officials of that government that's since been disposed, and he's a very good friend of Tulip Sadiq. And you notice how he framed the letter. Oh, it's okay, you've taken the right decision, I respect what you've done, but the door is still open. So he's trying to patch his own unexplained links with that government, and also to protect his friend. Louise Haigh didn't obviously warrant that same level of protection. But what I'll do now is move on to Tulip Sadiq, the former city minister, and in relation to how she's interacted with the welfare of the WealthTek clients, which has been raised on numerous occasions. So I'll just focus on that and why I feel that she misled Parliament in answering questions posed to her by Bob Blackman, Conservative MP, after the all-party parliamentary group report into the FCA. And you'll notice that I've, in the video, Tulip's treadmill, I've included the exchange that took place between them, and I'm just going to expand on that now. You'll notice that there was very, very synchronized narrative that she used with the FCA, and they rushed to say this is an historic report. It relates to incidents that happened in the past. The FCA has subsequently transformed themselves, so it's not really relevant. But she obviously also went on to express her confidence in the FCA. But the strange thing is of course, WealthTek contains many of those. The WealthTek scandal contains many of the same issues that were brought up in the report, i.e. shortcomings in whistleblowing, and also things like bullying and poor treatment of staff and whistleblowers themselves. So I think what we need to do now is look at a timeline between what happened and people who have made different interventions. Now I'll start on the 8th of August 2024, and Conservative MP Kevin Hollingrake wrote to Chancellor Rachel Reeves calling for an investigation into the FCA's conduct regarding the WealthTek scandal in light of reports that a whistleblower, myself, made claims of a potential fraud at WealthTek almost 2 years prior to their intervention. And they closed down the business in April 2023, and I'd raised concerns in July 2021. So see the videos 2 and 3, where I've posted in the rump of the concerns I raised with the FCA, and you can see that they're not that wildly out of what they've gone on to charge John Dance for. Again, we do have to remember that these still are allegations. Now, this letter was passed by Rachel Reeves onto the then City Minister Tulip Sadiq, which is not an unreasonable thing to do, given her remit at the time. Now, I'll then skip on to quite a few months onwards to the 26th of November 2024. This was the publication of the all-party parliamentary group report into the FCA. Now, shortly after that time, Sadiq took questions from Bob Blackman. As I've just noted, dismissed the report as largely historic, stating that the FCA had transformed and expressing confidence in the FCA. However, the WealthTek scandal was not included in that report, and along with the whole range of catastrophic, holistic failings of the FCA relating to the WealthTek scandal. I've covered some of these in the video Two Sides of the Same Coin. And even though that there's similarities that exist between the concerns of the report and the failings of the WealthTek scandal, which I've covered in this series of videos and in the book Lost to the Races. So the fact that she expressed concerns expressed confidence in the FCA, despite these repeated failures, and the links between those highlighted in the report and the WealthTek scandal, to me suggests that she misled Parliament, because I don't know how you could give those reassurances. And if we then skip on to the 18th of December, the FCA charges John Dance with 9 offences, including fraud and money laundering, over a 9-year period. And let's remember that the brief of the City Minister is clamping down on fraud and money laundering in the financial services industry and the wider economy. So it's absolutely absurd that Tulip Sadiq could have expressed confidence, having been handed Kevin Hollingwake's letter to look into the concerns relating to the FCA's conduct over the WealthTek scandal. So clearly, in my opinion, she misled Parliament. But also, going back to the theme that I identified when I opened this video, is quite clearly, and I've made this point throughout this series of videos, is WealthTek is just an inconvenience because it's getting in the way of the FCA's secondary objective and the government's desire, and the previous government's desire, to drive growth through financial services. They don't want to discuss it. They don't want to discuss the FCA's failings. So it's just another expression of that. The ignorance is bliss, that if an issue is inconvenient, if questions relating to that issue are inconvenient, just ignore them. Doesn't matter. Pretend they don't exist. That's the tactic. Now I'm now going to move on to the FCA's efforts to distort the narrative, and I've covered some of this as well in the video The Power of Narrative. So the FCA's desire to mislead the public in terms of the expediency of their actions and try to manipulate the narrative. To assist me in doing this, I have pasted in blocks of text in the description box, which I'll refer to as I go on. Now, the first block of text is the relevant extracts from Therese Chambers' Do the Right Thing speech, which was on the 1st of June 2023. And what you'll see here is there's a disgraceful tone to this speech, where she makes flippant remarks about Dick Francis novels and is trying to really show that the FCA were on the front foot. They acted expediently. They took swift action to protect clients, which, as again, you only have to refer to videos 2 and 3 and other videos if you want to watch them to see that it's complete nonsense. And it was a great insult to clients who were suffering at the time and continue to suffer. And what you'll see now is in the second block of text, I complained about the tone and the content of that speech. And all I got in response, I haven't wasted your time by pasting it in here, is just cut and paste nonsense. Just a summary of what they've done. Just, again, ignorance is bliss. Ignore the inconvenient questions. Now, I do keep in contact with former clients of Vertum Asset Management, which was the DFM arm of WealthTek. And, I'm quite fond of them because I was always grateful of their support, which is one of the reasons why I've got involved in this, because I think they've been treated appallingly. Now, a few of them have written directly to Therese Chambers and Nikhil Ratti complaining about this and asking for an explanation and an apology. Those letters, again, ignorance is bliss, inconvenient, ignore them. They don't matter, they're just individuals. Let's ignore them. The third block of text is some dialogue with an FCA investigator. I haven't named the person, that wouldn't be polite to do it, but it is relevant. I again raise the disgraceful narrative of Therese Chambers' speech here. And you will see that, again, this is an inconvenient question. It's just ignored, dismissed, as if it doesn't exist. And again, I try to raise the issues of client welfare and say, look, that you need to be upfront and honest with people that you failed, catastrophically failed, and just be honest about that. Just operate to the standard you would expect of those that you regulate. So if a firm makes mistakes to the detriment of clients, they're expected to apologise and put the clients back in the position they were prior to the failure. I just expected the same standards. Now, the interesting bit, if you follow this narrative with the investigator, they try to say that the whistleblower, because I raised concerns, because again, if you go back to the video, The Power of Narrative, I deconstruct some of the narrative the FCA used in their announcement that they charged John Dance. Again, you see similar chest-beating narrative that they acted swiftly, their investigation is much quicker than the average turnaround for investigations over some arbitrary time period. And, essentially what I was saying is, this isn't true, because we moved on quite a few months from April 2023, when they were trying to set up this compelled interview. And I said, look, why is it taking so long? Because I was the whistleblower. You've only reacted to a Times article and a conversation I had with the JSA, Joint Special Administrator. And they tried to say, well, it's that information existed, but it's within the intelligence unit of whistleblowing, so we didn't know about it. Now, I just don't think that's viable, because if you're launching a serious investigation, surely you're going to do a sweep of all the knowledge relating to the business of WealthTek. And similarly, if you're working on the whistleblowing side and you knew that investigation in place, you would say, look, we did pick up quite a few concerns here that are going to be relevant to you. But they try to shut that down with sort of soft confidentiality. But if you look at the block I posted at the end of the narrative, in the description box, which relates to the sort of closing remarks of November 2023, by this time I was somewhat exasperated. I'd actually waived my right for confidentiality because I just wanted them to get on with it, because I was concerned, I was exasperated, I got nowhere, nobody was really listening. And I would always say that I didn't want these allegations to be true. Not at all. I would love to be proven wrong. And it was never anything malicious towards John Dance. In the early part of our relationship, I enjoyed working with him. He has the potential of being a nice person and doing good. I just think he took the wrong path, and I was concerned that was having great impact on clients. And he has the right to defend himself. I respect that. Clearly, it's always going to come back to where was the money. So again, they're just trying to cover up their own failings, which again takes us right way into the heart of the problem of this regulator prosecutor model. You have a failed regulator that's failed way beyond whistleblowing, a whole range of holistic catastrophic failings, also operating as an investigator and prosecutor, trying to manage the narrative away from their own failings. Now, again, look at the narrative used by the investigator. This person is well drilled and trained on this. We've gone into this. We've investigated it ourselves. So she's only doing what she's been told or trained to do. Clearly, you make a moral judgment of whether you're doing the right thing. She's made that decision. They tried to say that they're not considering the actions of the FCA prior to April 2023. This is absolutely absurd, because, as I've argued in the book and the video, two sides of the same coin, is you cannot understand the allegations that they're making and what they've charged John Jantz for without understanding their own catastrophic failings. They are inextricably linked. Doesn't mean that it justifies what John Jantz is alleged to have done, but you cannot understand what he's alleged to have done without understanding the failings of the regulator which allowed him to do so, if he's indeed charged for that, convicted for that. So it's a complete nonsense. And I'd now skip again forward to November 2023 and those closing narratives. At that point, I was feeling quite distressed about this and very, very down, because I couldn't, the whistleblowing chap in the intelligence unit was coming, going. You couldn't get any continuity with him. I'd offered to have telephone conversations to speed things up and talk in much more detail than I can on express myself in an email. That was never really accepted. And I was feeling quite distressed, because I thought, nobody's listening, and they should do, because there are even things in the public that they should be questioning, never mind what I've told them. And I felt exceptionally down about it. It had a really big impact on my own sort of mental health. I'm a victim, of course. It's nothing in comparison to those who've had their assets potentially misused. Or certainly been frozen from them for so long. That had a massive impact. It was just like, I'd spoken to the accountant at Collingwood Wealth. I'd spoken extensively with the FCA. Prior to that, I'd had discussions with senior employees at the business, and it was just like trying to fight a war on my own, and thinking through the implications that, if I was right, what that would have on the lives of other people. It was really, really tough. But anyway, to close this out, we now have a new City Minister, Emma Reynolds. Not to close on a pessimistic note, but if you read her history, biography, if you like, will we see more cut and paste from Emma? Will we see ignorance is bliss, ignore inconvenient questions, just pretend they don't exist? Judge for yourself. I don't think it looks good. In the meantime, take care. I'll speak to you again.